Welcome to this week's moonLight of Emuna, Parshas Vaera. This week's learning should be a schus for a full shlem for Chanamash Bas Vilcha, Shmuel Shei Zalman Ben Chebachavim, Menachem Mordechai Ben Afira, and Lilnishmas Heni Bas Chiel Mechel, and Ratza Bas Menachem Mendel. So the beginning of the parsha opens up really a continuation of the conversation that Moshe Rabbeinu was having with Hashem at the end of last week's parsha. In last week's parsha, Hashem sends Moshe, as we know, Hashem sends Moshe to Parai, and after Moshe comes to Parai, Parai makes it life harder for the Jewish people. He takes away the straw, and he makes them do the same amount of work that they were doing before. And Moshe says at the end of the last week's parsha, they're hard psukim for us to hear. By Yoshev Moshe al Hashem, this is at the last few psukim of last week's parsha. Perek Hey, Pasuk Chav Beis, Vayoshev Moshe al Hashem. Moshe returns to Hashem, Vayomer Hashem, Lama Reis Lama Zeh. Why did you make it worse for this people? Lama Zeh Shlachtani, why did you send me? Me'az Basi al Parai, and since I came, from the time I came to Parai, L'daber B'Shmecha, to speak in your name, Heira Lama Zeh, he made it worse for the people, the Hatzal Etzal Tesamecha, and you have not saved your people. Now this sounds like a very strong statement that Moshe Rabbeinu is making. If the Torah didn't say it, we wouldn't imagine that these words can come out of Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth. It seems like Moshe Rabbeinu, who speaks to Hashem panim al panim, he had the clearest nevuah of anybody that ever lived, and he was an on of me'oid, and he seems to be complaining against Hashem, saying that why have you made it worse for the Jewish people? And Hashem responds to him, Vayom Hashem al Moshe ata sira es asher esel lepar. You'll see what I'll do to Parak, because with a strong hand I will send. He will send them. He'll send them out. Uviyel chazaki garsh. And with a strong hand he'll drive them from his land. And Rashi points out, this is still at the end of last week's parsha, that when he says Ata Sira, you'll see what I will do. That he says that you're questioning me, but Avram didn't question me, because I said that Yitzchak. I told Avram that Yitzchak will be his that's where his generations will propagate from. And afterwards I told him to bring him as an oila, and he never asked me any questions. Right? I told him that Yitzchak was going to be the continuation of his legacy, and then I told him to kill Yitzchak, and he never questioned me. Right? So that seems to be Hashem's response. And then we get to this week's parsha. We open this week's parsha in Perek Vav, Pasuk Beis, Vayidaber shal Moshe, Vayomer Elov ani Hashem. He says, I am Hashem. And Rashi tells us that this is a continuation of the conversation at the end of last week's parsha. And then it says, Vaera el Avram el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov. I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and Yaakov, bekel Shakai, with the name Kel Shakai, ushmi Hashem lenedat lem. And I didn't make my name known, my Kel Shakai name known to them. And Rashi says one of the most curious Rashis in Chumash that everybody asks about, when the pasuk says Ve'era el Avram el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov, that I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rashi says Ela Avos, to the fathers. And the question that everybody asks on this Rashi is, we know who Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were. We just finished the whole Sefer Bereshis. We know who Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are. If the pasuk tells me that Hashem said, I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov, so I know that that's the Avos. That's who we know, that Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So what is Rashi adding by saying Ela Avos, to the fathers? I saw a beautiful idea in the Sefer Divrei Yeshua. He explains this whole conversation between Hashem and Moshe very differently than the way we assumed. We assumed that Hashem tells Moshe, go to Parai, and I'm going to redeem the Jewish people. Moshe goes to Parai, and things get worse. And Moshe is saying, what's going on? You told me it's going to get better, and it got worse, right? As if Moshe is questioning Hashem's judgment. Says the Divrei Yeshua, he says it's different. That's not what was going on over here. Moshe Rabbeinu's Emuna in Hashem was perfect. Moshe spoke to Hashem face to face, like we mentioned. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that Hashem was going to keep his promise. Moshe had no question that Hashem was going to do exactly what he said. But what Moshe didn't understand, what Moshe was worried about, not that he didn't understand, Moshe was worried about was the temporary setback. He understood that Hashem has a plan, and Hashem said, go speak to Parai, and I'm going to redeem the Jewish people. But this temporary setback, and Moshe understood that's part of Hashem's plan, but the temporary setback, Moshe was afraid, was going to have a very negative consequence. And what that's going to be is that Moshe says, my Emuna is fine. I know perfectly. I have trust in you. And if something looks bad, it's going to be good, and it's part of your plan. I have no problem with that. I know that. But I don't know if the Jewish people have that. That's why Moshe says in the pasuk that we quoted before for the end of last week's parsha, since I came to speak in your name, Hera la'am hazeh. You did bad for the nation, right? And in the pasuk before that, he said, "Lama hare oisa am hazeh." Why did you do evil to the people? He keeps mentioning the Why is he mentioning the Just say, "You promised me that it was going to be good, and now it's now it's bad." If Moshe was questioning Hashem's promise, then he would have just said, "You promised me geula. I don't see geula." Why is he focusing on the Because what Moshe was worried about, what Moshe was concerned about, was that the Jewish people would fall from their Emuna. That when Moshe first came to the Jewish people and told them what Hashem said, also back in last week's parasha a little bit earlier, it says in Perek Daled, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, it says, Vayamin ha'am, that the people believed. The people believed what Moshe was saying. Vayishmu, and they heard, which we discussed a little about last week. Ki pakad Hashem es bnei Yisrael, that Hashem remembered the Jewish people, his children. V'chiroas anyam, and he saw their affliction. Vayiktu v'yishtachu, and they bowed their heads and they prostrated themselves. That when they heard Moshe's news, that they were very excited. They were very excited and they believed. They had great emuna. And then what happens? Then Paro makes things worse. And when the Jewish taskmasters or the Jewish captains, they come to complain to the Egyptians, they say, "Oh, you're lazy. You want to go serve Hashem. It's no good." And then what happens after they come out of speaking to the Egyptian officers? It says in Pasuk Parakei Pasuk Chaf, "Vayifku es Moshe v'es Aaron." They meet Moshe and Aaron, Nitzavim lekrasam, who are standing opposite them. But says Meis Parava Yomru Aleim. They say to them, "Yera Hashem Aleichem v'yishpoid asher hivashtem esrei." Hashem should look on you and judge, because you made our scent. I'm sorry. You made our scent disgusting. In the eyes of Paro, in the eyes of his servants. You gave them a sword to murder them. So Moshe is saying, look what happened. When I first came and I gave this news that Hashem is going to redeem the Jewish people, they were excited. They believed. They had Emuna. They felt that their tefillos were all the years that they had been davening to Hashem for Geula. Everything was coming true. And then they see it gets worse, and they turn around. And now they're upset at us, and they say, you made things worse. They're losing their Emuna. Says Moshe to Hashem, Lama haroisa la'am hazeh. Why did you make it worse? They were in such a good place of Emuna. And from the minute I came to speak to Paro, Heira la'am hazeh, you made it worse. V'hatza lo hitzaltes amecha. It's too much of a pause for them. They don't have such a strong Emuna. Or I'm worried that this is going to ruin their Emuna. The Jewish people were standing in a great place. Chazal tell us that the only reason they were redeemed from Mitzrayim was because of the Emuna that they had. Moshe says, now we're gonna ruin their Emuna. They had such strong Emuna. They believed. When I told them that Hashem is going to save them, they believed and they stood up and they were excited. And now you gave them a setback. So I understand there's some plan, and my Emuna is not affected, but the Jewish people's Emuna is going to be destroyed. That was Moshe's complaint to Hashem. I'm not questioning you, Hashem. I'm not questioning you whether you're going to keep your word. Of course I know you're going to keep your word. But the people are not on that same level. They haven't spoken to you face to face. They didn't see the burning bush. They don't know what's going to happen. And now we were in such a good place of Emuna. The Jewish people's Emuna was so solid, and now we risk losing that. That was what Moshe's concern was. I want to hold on to. How do I get them? How do I get them to hold on to their Emuna when they see such a setback after such a beautiful promise after so many years of Golus? And that's what Hashem responds to him in this week's parsha. Hashem responds to Moshe Rabbeinu at the beginning of this week's parsha. Don't be afraid that the Jewish people are going to fall from their Emuna. That's why Hashem says, Vaera el Avram el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov. I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. But it's not just that I appeared to three tzaddikim who had a high level of Emuna, right? You can argue that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were on a high level like you, Moshe. I spoke to them. They had a high level of Emuna that they knew that everything I was going to say was going to be true. But it wasn't just Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and that's what Rashi adds, El Ha'avos, to the fathers. What Rashi is saying, well, first, the Rashi last week says that when I told Avram that I'm going to make him into a nation through Yitzchak, and I told him to kill him, he didn't ask after me, right? He didn't question my judgment. You know why he didn't question my argument? That's what Rashi is telling us in this week, because these are the avos. These are not just three tzaddikim who had great emuna. These were three tzaddikim who were the avos. These are the forefathers of the Jewish people. And they embedded this sense of emuna. That I mentioned last week, Rashi says that I mentioned, which Hashem was telling Moshe Moshe that Avram Avinu never questioned me, that wasn't just some unique thing about Avram Avinu, that Avram Avinu was on a high madrega, on a high level, and therefore he didn't question me. He was one of the avos. That's what Rashi points out. El Avram, El Yitzchak, El Yaakov, these were the avos. This wasn't just three great people who had a high level of Emuna. These were three great people who had a high level of Emuna and embedded it in their children. It became part of the DNA of the Jewish people. These are the avos of Bnei Yisrael. And we know that, and they gave this as Yerusha to their children. And therefore, says Hashem, even if there's a setback, and even if they're complaining to you and they're saying Hashem should judge you, you made it worse for us, it'll never shake their Emuna. It's part of the DNA. It's embedded in the makeup of every single Jew. This Emuna. We may have setbacks. We may have moments of confusion. We may have moments that we don't feel it, and it feels like we're lost. But know this, Moshe, you're going to become the leader of the Jewish people. What you have to know is that this Vaera el Avram el Yitzchak Yaakov, this that I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, this that they never questioned me, even when things seem to be contradictory, know that is in the people you're about to lead out of Mitzrayim. There's never going to be a question of Emuna. There's going to be setbacks, and we're going to have issues, and we know that the Jewish people tested Hashem in the Midbar many times, but Emuna, that I'm here and I'm orchestrating things, that is embedded deep in the Jewish people. So when we have setbacks, we have things, right? But it's very different if you, Moshe, are going to be the leader of the Jewish people. If you think they could lose their Emuna, that's a problem. If you recognize that they have that Emuna, okay, we have to deal with it sometimes. Sometimes we have to bring that Emuna to the forefront. We have to bring that out. We have to nurture it. But know that it's always there. And if you know that it's always there, then you know who you're dealing with. Then you know that it's the Bnei Yisrael, and they are the children of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they will never fully doubt me. They may have moments of confusion, they may have setbacks, but they'll never fully doubt me. They'll always have that Emuna. And therefore, when I set up the world this way, and Pare seems to make it harder, there's a reason, and they know that deep down. And they're never ultimately going to question me. They're always going to come back to me, and they're always going to have that Emuna. And that Emuna is what brought about the Golus, as Chazal said, and what's going to bring out the future Golus. And you see that in the current situation in Eretz Yisrael. You see the level of Emuna that's been bursting forth from places we never expected it before. We've never seen it before. Right? Jews who maybe had no shaykhs to Emuna, all of a sudden there's an Emuna, there's a faith, there's a love of other Jews, a love of Hashem, and a single-mindedness in Eretz Yisrael. There's a faith that we haven't seen before. That's the Emuna that Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the avos that Rashi points out. That's what the Emuna that they embedded in us, that they made a part of our DNA. And I'll just add that in Pasuk Hey, at the beginning of the parasha, it says, "V'gam ani shamati es nakas b'nei Yisrael." Hashem says to Moshe that I have heard the groans of the Jewish people. B'nei Yisrael, Hashem Mitzrayim, Avida Moshe, that the Egyptians were enslaving them. Ve'eskar es bris, and I remembered my covenant. Again. Harking back to the Avos, I remembered the promise I made to the Avos. But the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel, said on this, he said that, there's a famous question that we always ask. If all the tzaddikim of all the generations davened so hard for Mashiach, and they davened and they cried and they were much greater than us, and it didn't work, it looks like it didn't work. So how are we supposed to bring Mashiach, right? This is a famous question everybody always asks. He says this is what Hashem is answering in that pasuk. I heard all the groans. Right now when Hashem is saying, I'm taking you out of the Mitzrayim, there were many Jews who had cried for many years who are no longer with us. Though Hashem is saying, I heard those groans also. I heard those cries. For whatever reason, it wasn't the time yet. I couldn't bring the Geula yet because there were still things that had to be worked out. And you don't understand my plans. But don't think for 1 second that I ignored one of those. That I ignored a single one of those cries. Every one of those cries leads to the ultimate redemption. And therefore, we need to know in our times and with the difficulties that we're going through, that our tefillas could be the ones to bring the final redemption. It's not that our tefillas have to do the whole thing. All of those tefillas of our ancestors for the last 2,000 years, davening for Mashiach, davening for Geula, is all cumulative. Hashem has all of that in front of him, just waiting for the right time when everything is set just so for the Geula to come. I heard every one of those tefillas. I saw every one of those tears, and I'm holding on to them until the right time comes until those final tefillahs that'll push us over the edge. So it's not that we have to think that, if Rav Moshe Feinstein couldn't bring Mashiach, how am I going to? Rav Moshe Feinstein did help bring Mashiach. We're going to add our little part. He may have done a bigger part. The Chavetz Chaim, the Vilna Gaon, the Baal Shem Tov, all the tzaddikim of the years, all the Tanoim and Amoraim, all of them did their part. And Hashem is holding on to that till the right moment arrives when everything is the way it's supposed to be for the Gula. But we should never think that it's wasted, and neither are our little tears, because our little tears could be the ones that get us to that final spot of what we need. And that's why Hashem says, "Ve'esker es brisa," I remember my covenants, that at the moment that I remember the bris, the time comes for the geula. So then everything will become clear, and you'll see how all of those things, all of those tefillas, all of those tears brought about exactly what we needed to be at the moment that we needed to be. And that's why he makes the diuk that the pasuk says ve'eskar es brisi, and I will remember my bris. Right? If Hashem's talking to Moshe and he's talking about the gula, it should say I remembered the bris. Hashem says at the exact moment that the Jews are supposed to leave, that I will remember the bris. And the same is true for us today in 2024 with what's going on in the world. All of those tefillahs that we've said and that every Jew has said for the last thousands of years, and every tear that was shed is all waiting in front of Hashem for the right exact moment. And our tefillahs, we continue to storm Shemayim, to continue to daven, to continue to say Tillim, to continue to do Chesed, to continue to learn Torah. All of that will push to the exact moment when Hashem says "Ve'eskar es brisi," and I will remember the bris that I made to redeem the Jewish people. And then Hashem goes on to the different lashonis of Geula. That's exactly what leads us to there. So we always have to remember that, and never to become discouraged and think that everything was wasted. Nothing was wasted. Every tefillah, every tear is being saved for the right exact moment, and all of that is going to push us to the ultimate Geula. May we see it very quickly, very speedily in our days. It should happen immediately. I wish you all a great Shabbos.